Hey everybody, Andrew Scheps here, and I wanted to walk you through the Scheps track selector. So I'm going to bring it up on the screen here. And you notice the very first thing it does is when you open the surface, it tells you I need to get some information about your session. So I'm going to go ahead and let it do this. And it does take a little while if you get a large session. This is a relatively, moderate-sized rock mix stereo session. So there are over 100 tracks, but it doesn't take too long. And what it's doing is it will go through the session, it will open up all your folders, look at all your tracks, and it gathers information about all of the insert assignments, send assignments, input assignments, output assignments, MIDI assignments, instrument assignments, and then it basically has a database not only of what's been assigned to every track, but whether that track is inside of a folder and whether that track has been explicitly hidden by the user. And let's see, we're almost done here with our 114 tracks. So once that's done, it'll bring us to the main screen, once it puts your session back the way you had it. And now what you can see is basically it's like an expanded view of a channel strip, just side by side for the UI, because when it was really tall, it was a bit hard to use. And for the selected track, it shows you the inserts. So you can see right now snare verb is the selected track, and here's the track name right here. It shows the inserts. This doesn't have any sends. It shows you the input, the output. There's no MIDI input or MIDI output on this. And it shows you the type of track. Then what you can do is go to any track in the session and say update selected track, and now this information will reflect that track. It doesn't do it automatically, so you can still click around your session, select tracks, but it will keep the reference track locked until you say, oh, well, hold on a second, I actually want this to be my selected track. Then what you can do is click on any of the assignments and it will select all of the tracks in the session that have similar assignments. So let's say I clicked on the EQ37 band, it would go through and find every track in the session that has the EQ37 band, and it would select and show that track. And then there are preferences down here as to whether or not it will include inactive tracks, whether or not it will include hidden tracks. Now, these are the tracks that you explicitly hid, not that are hidden because they're inside of folders. So there's a difference there. And then look inside closed folders. So if they're currently hidden from view because they're inside a closed folder, you can decide whether or not you want to open that up. So it could just be the tracks that are visually showing that are active, and that's with all three of those off. Or you could say you can go ahead and include inactive tracks, go ahead and look inside the folders and open them if you need to, and you can include hidden tracks if you want. So if I include all of these and click on EQ3, it will go through and select, it had to open up a couple of folders, and now it's selected all of the tracks in the session with EQ3. And it doesn't have to be in the same slot. It can be in any insert slot, because it didn't seem to make sense to me to search for things that have an insert in insert C. That's a bit too specific. Because let's say, come down here to some background vocals, and let me make this guy my selected track. Let's say you just want to find all the tracks in your session that have Melodyne on them so that you can then run the Melodyne commit script or something like that. This will very quickly go ahead and do it. And in that case, you probably don't want to include inactive tracks. And you may not want to include hidden tracks because, well, personally for me, I never hide anything that is active except for auxes that are connecting to Isotope RX or something like that. But you keep in mind what the state of the tracks are, and then decide what you want to actually select. So that's how it works with inserts. It gets slightly more complicated when you start working with inputs, outputs, and sends because there are more options. So let's say that I've got this track here is my track, my reference track. It has sends assigned to a bunch of different buses, internal buses, as it turns out, but it would work just the same if they were being sent to I/O. Now, you can right-click any of these sends and say, select assignments to this, but this will select any track whose input is that bus, whose output is that bus, or who has a send that's going to that bus. Most of the time, that's too much stuff. So let's say I just want to find the slap here. So what I can do is say I want to select based on a send assignment. And if I come down here, here are the options for sends. I want, when I click on a send, for it to select a track whose input is that bus. That will take me to the track that that bus is sending to. But I could just as easily say, well, no, actually, I want to see all of the tracks that are sending to slap, because there's something in the slap and I don't like it and I can't find it. Where is it? So now if I click on slap, it will select these two tracks, which are both assigned to the send slap. And if I said outputs in this session, I don't think anything is actually going there. But for outputs, inputs and outputs, you get the same choices. So let's say this is I'm down here looking at the slap and I want to know, well, who is sending to slap? I could say for inputs, select sends, and come here, select slap, and now I've got the exact same selection I had when I just selected the sends. So you can selectively have tracks selected based on their input assignment, output assignment, or send assignment as it maps to other tracks' inputs, outputs, and sends. So it might seem slightly confusing when you first get used to it, but it's a very powerful tool and it will only select the tracks you want, especially being able to ignore inactive tracks or ignore hidden tracks. You'll get exactly the selection you want, and then you can very quickly do a shift option or find the stuff you're doing. Now you can also select all of the auxes in your session. I don't know why you would want to do that necessarily, but here they are. These are all my auxes. And if I selected a VCA and then made that my thing, now I can select all my VCAs, and that will select all the VCAs in the track, and the same with auxes or folders or audio tracks or MIDI tracks or instrument tracks. And the folders are, I believe, split up into routing folder and basic folder, so you can find those types of folders independently. And again, all with the modifiers of whether or not to look inside of closed folders, include hidden tracks, or include inactive tracks. That is the basic thing. Now, when we first launched the Surface and it built this session cache, the session cache will need to be updated. If you've changed input assignments, you've moved tracks into new folders, you've added new tracks to the session, you've made tracks inactive, there's no way for the application to actually keep up with that. So what you would do is just rebuild your session cache from scratch. So that's the way to just from scratch go through all of the tracks once again and do that. And I probably shouldn't have gone ahead and done that, and I'm not going to edit this video, so you're going to sit with me and watch it scan 114 tracks. But now you know all the information it's getting. It's actually not slow. And the cool thing is you can actually play the session while it's doing the cache. I wouldn't recommend reassigning things, but you could easily mix. You could change levels, you could change automation modes, you can solo, you can mute, all that kind of stuff. And it will still read the information in the background. Runs a little bit slower, but who cares, because you continue to work. So as long as you're not changing the things that it is scanning, like input assignments or send assignments or inserts, then it's totally fine to actually run your session while that's happening. If you've just reorganized your session and you just want to update the folder info so that the app knows what tracks are inside of what folders, then you can just click Update Folder Info, and that is much faster. That happens in the background. I don't even bother giving you a progress dialog because you don't need it. The other functions that are similar but different, you'll notice there's a magnifying glass for every single one of the types of data that you can search based on. So I've showed you before all of the searches were done based on a selected track, which can be very handy if you're trying to find things, sending to a reverb, stuff like that, or like I said, you want to find all the Melodyne. But you don't have to find a reference track first. I could just say, find all of the tracks in the session that have Melodyne. And it will go ahead and do that, and now it's selected my Melodyne tracks. You can do the same with send assignments, and it only shows you used send assignments. So now I can find the slap, and this is selected based on this down here. So what I could say is, well, I just want to find the actual slap track. So show me what is got the input set to slap. Or you can do output, input, MIDI output. You can also search for a track name. I mean, you can do this in Pro Tools as well, but if you just really quickly want to find your kick out track, well, you can do that. So the search is a global search for everything used in the session, which can be really handy. And then there's one other feature which was added because a user asked for it specifically. If you're prepping sessions to send to somebody else to mix, you can very quickly say, well, export a used plugins list. And what it does is it creates a text file on your hard drive of all of the plugins that are actually active in the session. So this way, you could send this to someone who's going to be working on the session and say, are there any of these plugins you don't have? Because if so, I can go ahead and freeze the tracks or render, do whatever you want to do, or replace them with something else. And it's just a really quick way to get a report of all of the plugins used in the session. I think that's it. So enjoy.